Hi, welcome to Karen's Conversations number 41. Today I have the great pleasure of talking to Stig Panduro. Stig is the Cloud Business Development Director at NetApp, and we're going to talk about cloudy with a chance of change. So welcome, Stig. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Karen. I really appreciate the opportunity. My name is Stig Panduro. I originally hail from Denmark. I worked for a Danish software company that Microsoft acquired many years ago, way before cloud, dare I even say, back in 2002. That provided an opportunity for me to move to Seattle, work for Microsoft in the Walmart era, which was interesting on many levels. One of the levels that was the most interesting was around cloud, because this was the time where Microsoft was envisioning and articulating Azure, or what would later become Azure. And Azure was announced in 2008 and launched in 2010. Post my Microsoft career, I've spent time with a handful of software companies, and most recently, as you said, am with NetApp, where I am working to help customers in financial services, because as if cloud wasn't complicated enough, I decided to do it for financial services. So my focus is actually helping transition my financial services customers to the Azure cloud.
Fascinating. Before we get into, so tell me why it's a challenge for financial organizations, or why it's even more complicated.
It was more, well, first of all, traditionally financial services organizations are large and conservative, and I don't think I insult anybody by saying somewhat slow moving or diligent, and there's good reason for that. There is a variety of regulations around financial services, so requirements for security, for identity management, for audits, way higher, and the consequences of failing any of that stuff is very dire. So executives can literally go to jail over this stuff, right? So financial services people are a little more, for good reason, a little more diligent, a little more careful. They rarely want to be first movers. They want to see someone else go through it, and they want to learn from their mistakes or whatever they did right. So I feel like in financial services, they're not the first to go, but when they do go big. So it requires a lot of patience and a lot of resilience to be successful in that space.
Awesome. So we all talk about the cloud, and we all have our own photographs and data and stuff in the cloud. So everyone's talking about it, but just so we're all on the same page, Stig, how would you explain to the totally uninitiated what is cloud computing?
Yes, first of all, I think it's a great question, because for many years, people have kind of been in the void where that definition was really out there, and kind of been coming up with their own. But if I were to explain it to the uninitiated, I think I would say cloud computing is putting almost infinite compute power and infinite storage at the fingertips of organizations and individuals almost by magic. So the idea is that rather than go out and procure a massive server and a lot of networking and a lot of computers, you can log on to a web portal, type in the username or password typically, and at your fingertips you have pretty much anything that your heart desires in terms of compute power, in terms of platform tools to either consume or build your own software that can be consumed as a service. So like an example I think could be, it might be overused, but one is, rather than owning your own car when you need a car, you can call an Uber, right? And an Uber, they're going to arrive on time, they're going to get you to your destination, the car is going to be clean, the driver is going to be polite. If you want a bigger car, you can order a bigger one, pay a little bit more. If you need 10 Ubers, if you're moving a wedding party, you only do that once in a lifetime, but you can get 10 Ubers without having to buy 10 cars. So the promise of the cloud, I would also say, in addition to the definition from before, is that you buy what you need and you pay for it when you consume it. Unlike the older models, and I think, again, I can say this because I was part of that generation of IT salespeople, we would supersize the customer, right? We would sell them more than they needed, and we would make them pay for everything up front. That world has changed. You can't get away with that anymore. So now customers, they will consume exactly what they need, and they will pay for it only when they consume it. So that's a massive change for anybody in this space.
Awesome. And you've touched on some of the advantages, like from a cost perspective and like an as you need it. What are some of the other advantages and benefits to organizations?
I think one is elasticity and scalability around what you need. So a little bit back to the wedding example, right? If you need massive amounts of compute power for a short period of time, right? If you have a seasonal business, for example, rather than going out and investing in a data center that sits there all year round, that you only utilize 20% for 80% of the year, and then you use it 90% in those peak months, you can just scale up as you need it, right? So it gives you a much, much larger degree of flexibility in terms of what you consume, how you consume, and how much you pay for.
Brilliant. And when organizations are embarking on a journey towards cloud, where do you find they tend to focus? Is it like people, process, the technology, methodologies?
Well, so first of all, I don't know that there is kind of an established pattern yet. I feel it's very different from organization to organization. I would say one of the things they don't start off with is people, right? That seems to come very, very late in the equation. Most organizations, I think, are fascinated by the technology, and it's typically driven by, a handful of very inspired people who have kind of caught the bug and who recognizes that wherever there is complexity, there's opportunity, and that this can be good for their career in their current employer or somewhere else, but this is something that's coming, and it's inevitable. I'm going to learn everything about it. I'm going to champion and pioneer it, right? So the technology and I think the opportunities that offers are recognized by some, and that kind of starts. So I would say it starts with a curiosity around the technology. What ideally where it works best is that when it's driven by a business need, right? When there's a line of business group that says we need a fast return of time to market, or we need high returns, or whatever it might be, and then that puts the pressure back on the technologists. But I don't think that's always the way it goes. Many times it's kind of spun out of technology, and it kind of trickles up from there. So kind of that I feel change management. Is it driven by change? It's definitely driven by a need. I think they're all kind of eyeing each other, right? So there is a need and an interest and a desire to know what's the other guy doing, what are they thinking, and how do I get ahead? And they know this is coming. They know this can be a driver of competitive advantage. But I'd still say maybe that's 20-30% of the ones out there that are saying we're doing this game for competitive advantage now. But there is a pressure that is coming. They know they're going to have to deal with it. That wasn't there 8-10 years ago.
Mm. And it's interesting when you say, I have this conversation with a number of clients when they say it's like an initiative, like we need to do cloud, or we need to become more agile, or we need to do this. And I'm like, my first question is why? Like, why? Oh, because they're doing it. No. Why are you doing it? So, and I think you sort of touched on that. It's like, there has to be a business case. And sometimes we jump on the new shiny thing that's happening and don't actually say, is this right for the organization to do?
But I think a comment to that would be that is very true for the folks who've been around for a long time. There's a whole new ecosystem of providers and of businesses out there that are born in the cloud that don't have this problem, right? They don't carry that baggage, that kind of all that legacy investment, all that old processes, old way of thinking. They never knew any other way. Right? Well, one example of that is actually going back to my Microsoft days. I remember a company meeting in Seattle. They put, 12,000 people in one of the stadiums down there. And we had Ray Ozzie. Not everybody knows Ray, but he is probably most known for being the father of Lotus Notes. And actually, when Bill Gates left Microsoft, Ray came in to be the chief architect. He was there for 5-6 years, and he is responsible for a lot of the visionary thinking around Microsoft's cloud offering as it is today. And I remember this meeting clearly. And again, it sounds like it's 50 years ago, but it's only 12, 13 years ago. And he was going to explain to 12,000 people what was the cloud. And these are Microsoft people, right? They're highly educated, they're technologists. And the example he chose to use was, imagine if you had your phone, you took a picture with it. Phones could take pictures back then, but they lived on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Imagine you take a picture and it goes somewhere into the cloud, and then you can see it instantly on your computer or on your tablet, or you can even share with other people, with your mother overseas. Imagine that. And everybody was, wow, that's fantastic. If I told that to my kids, they would look at me like, what are you talking about? They never knew any other world. It's a kind of a silly little example, but that also goes for businesses, right? They're used to something completely different. And many of us still think, wow, it'd be amazing if we take a picture and share it through the cloud, right? We kind of, in all of that, that's very, very passe, right? That's not going to impress anybody anymore.
Yeah, to be born digital. So you've touched on, Stig, that it does impact people. So what are some business-wide impacts on moving to cloud that has people impact from your experience?
So I think you could look at it two ways, right? There is the supply side of cloud, so the people who make the cloud technologies and sell them. I think I represent that. And then there's the buy side of it, right? The consumers and the organizations that buy the cloud. Either, I guess, a quick word of definition, right? Typically, we talk about 3 layers in cloud computing. And think of it as a layer cake. At the bottom, there's what's called infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, which is the infrastructure, the machines, the network, and the nuts and bolts of it. And some invest at that level. A consumer would never, ever do that. But there are companies out there who need that to build their own platform. I think an example would be Salesforce.com, who's built their own platform on top of infrastructure. If you don't want to do that, there's a platform layer above it, middle layer of the layer cake, the PaaS layer. Those are for people who have bought software that they need a platform to deploy it on, or are building their own software. On top of that is the software as a service. So that's what a lot of us consume. That's Office 365, it's Salesforce.com, it's Netflix, it's all the apps on our phones, right? That service there where you go in and you take out a subscription to software. So I feel that kind of bearing that in mind, right? On the supply side, those of us who are building that technology stack somewhere, like we're integrated with it at some point. Everybody who builds software has had to get used to, unless they were born in the cloud, to this idea of a changing architecture, of having all this amazing compute power. There are limits, but they're higher, I guess. And compared to what they were in the past, they're virtually non-existent. So all of a sudden, at your fingertip, you can build applications that have a huge appetite for compute or storage, or wherever it might be. You don't have these bottlenecks or limitations to the same extent that you had before. So that's a fantastic opportunity. Of course, the flip side of that is, the more that you consume, the more expensive it gets for your customer on the other side. You have to go out and acquire all that. So there's a balance there. But for the people who built it, fantastic ability to scale and to add value to their software product. The people who sell it, still talking about the supply side, things are completely different. And I think this is a realization that organizations slowly are coming to. You can't just go out and launch a cloud product and say, I'm in the cloud now, right? Everything changes. The skill sets required to sell it, the processes required to recognize the revenue, the tools, down to your CRM system, right? Everything is different. And very few customers or companies have made that leap and burnt their bridges and say, we're going all in, we're putting all our chips on the cloud. Again, an example kind of pulling from my background. Can you imagine the conversations they must have had in the boardroom at Microsoft when they decided to bet everything on moving the Office franchise, arguably the largest revenue generator at Microsoft at the time, to Azure, right? And the conversation must have gone something along the lines of, we're going to take all this revenue and, rather than getting it next year, we're going to split up in chunks and you're going to get it over the next 10 years. Eventually it'll grow, it'll hockey stick, but, Mr. CFO, plan for this, right? That is a ballsy call, and not everybody's willing to make that. So that's why you get these kind of weird, half-assed attempts at going to the cloud, but not really. And then they start something to pull back, and no, we didn't see this coming. And so that is a very, very big change, and that has implications for people too, right? People are in that. All of a sudden, they have to sell a different way. All of a sudden, they're measured in a different way. All of a sudden, they're the way they get compensated changes. And not all companies take some time to figure that out. So there's a lot of change there on the sales side, for sure. On the buy side, on the people that consume it, one of the things that you see, we got before I talked about, kind of the people who are the avant-garde, who are out there, who are curious, who recognize this as an opportunity. There's kind of a longer tail of people who are not necessarily seeing it at that, right? They see it almost more as a threat to the way they have been used to running their jobs for 30 years maybe. And that's not just in cloud, that's everywhere, right? Change is difficult, and people need to really embrace it, and it's there's risk. So I feel like there is people who are kind of going through that, and they used to be the networking guy or whatever, and they used to, those was their little fiefdom, and people had to come to them if they needed anything networking. Now all you have to do is go to the Azure portal, log in, and you can provision a network, right, or a virtual machine or whatever it is. Now I think what people need to realize is that their jobs just became way more interesting, because you don't want to be the storage administrator if you don't have to. I would say your job could be way more strategic, way more impactful. This has tremendous opportunities. So I feel like people should be embracing that more. And this is not, I feel, some others might disagree, this is not like the coal miner that we are now going to put in a clean tech job, right? The chasm is not that big. The vast majority of people can make that transition. Different story if you're digging coal in the mines of West Virginia, all of a sudden we're going to move you to Silicon Valley because there's like some green tech company that needs a technologist. That would be a tougher transition. But I think at the macro level, cloud generates way more jobs, right? This is not about cutting jobs. At the micro level, there will be some changes, and people, I think, need to embrace that. And the ones who do, I think, stand to benefit from it. This is a career changer for many of us.
Yeah, that's interesting what you say, Stig, because I talk to people like there's a lot of stuff about robotics and artificial intelligence going on at the moment, and it's like, it's going, the robot's going to take our jobs, and I keep saying to people, the research out there is saying that that's not going to happen. It's actually going to create jobs, but the thing is, your job will probably change. It's not going to get rid of it, but it'll fundamentally change. And I think the issue that we have, and the same as what you're saying, we're not having the conversations with people to say, yes, you're a network administrator today, but hey, we're going cloud. This is the opportunity that is there for you. This is going to be far more interesting than the stuff the humdrum stuff you used to have to do. A lot of it will be done for you, and you'll get to do far more interesting stuff. And then people go, cool, I'm on board. Take me on the journey. Where do I sign? But the thing is, I think we don't have those conversations. They just hear, oh, we're going cloud. Oh, God. And then there's this fear. And we're not having the right conversations. We just assume they will get it and be on board. And it's such a simple thing to do, is just have the conversation. So people start to
do you think it's simple though, or it's because we don't know how to have it? Do we have in organizations the right vision? Are we able to communicate it at every level, at the business level, technology level, at the people level? Or do people just kind of skip over it? I wonder. Sometimes I feel like it's because we don't know how to have it, right? It hasn't been thought through at every level. It hasn't trickled down through all the organizations because we're doing things for the first time. We're trailblazing this path. Right? 20 years from now, it'll look easier. But I'm curious with your opinion as well. Do you feel like they're holding back because they're afraid of how that's going to land, or do they just don't know how to position it?
I think they make assumptions that, we're going to cloud because there's cost benefits, we can scale, we can do all this, and people will just get it. Well, they won't. We need to have the conversation. And it's not a one-way communication. It's a conversation where people can ask questions and, I don't understand what it means to my job, or I don't understand why we're doing it, and have that dialogue. So a collaboration platform when people can ask questions and someone's going to respond to them. I just see change being done to people rather than being done with them, and
yes.
Not bringing them along. I was going to use the cliche on the journey, but just having the conversation. This is what And from, like you said, Stig, from a business perspective, we're doing this because this is what it means for our organization, because we've got competition, we've seen it, and unless we do it, we won't exist in 5 years' time, whatever it might be. But then also the conversation, and this is what it means for you. So people have the conversation on two levels, one from an organizational perspective, from a strategic aspect, and then from an individual perspective, what's it mean for me as an individual? Is my job going to change? You know, am I going to have a job? And those conversations that people, unless we have them, they go home and they're scared and they're uncertain and stressed and anxiety. And then we just keep adding to it. And all we need to do, and I say it's simple, but you know, communication needs to be thought through, and the conversation needs to be thought through. And every audience is different needs, etc. So, but it really is just having a conversation. So that's when I say it's simple, that's what I mean. It's just like, talk to people, tell them how we're doing it and what it means for them.
Even if the answer is, I don't know, but we are here to help you. We're going to get through this together. I don't have all the answers for you, but you know, this is what I think, and you know, hop on board, jump in. The water is nice. We're going to figure this out together. I think that alone is a nice warm hug for a lot of people, which they kind of need in times of change and transition.
Absolutely. Spot on. Absolutely. So how do you see organizations, what we've just talked about, you know, so we're going to go cloud. We're doing it for these reasons. Do you see them engaging people in the sort of way we've just talked about? And if not, how should they deal with it?
No, I don't think I do. Obviously, I'm not privy to everything. A lot happens kind of behind closed doors, but I don't, even, you know, the companies I've worked for, I don't see that being elevated as like an organizational conversation that every manager is asked to have with their people, because it's going to touch everybody eventually, right? And everybody should be able to articulate, at a minimum, the strategic direction of the company that hopefully includes some sort of cloud direction. But no, I think I'm sure it's happening here and there. I think a lot of places happening in pockets, departmentally. I think that's an area where we as an industry could do much, much better.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, from my observations, we still don't grasp the people side of things that we're doing. You know, we do change, and yeah, again, I think assumption that people will get it. Of course they'll get it. Makes sense. Yeah, well, you need to have that conversation with people just to make sure, even just to check in that they do get it, you know, that they're on board and they're going to come along.
But I think there are some that have perfected that, and the rest of us could probably learn from that. But the ones have kind of been leading in this industry, right? I keep talking about Microsoft because the one that comes to mind. But Microsoft has spent a good chunk of the last 15 years talking to their people about this, because what a massive change, right? And they're still going through. They're going to go through for another 15 years. So I feel like there is, you know, a kind of an elite group of organizations probably who have been through that the rest of us can look to and can learn from. And I'm sure books have been written about it. Maybe you wrote one of them, the way we can leverage a lot of those best practices.
Oh, absolutely. And there are so many great stories out there. I'm doing a series of little videos this week about examples of organizations that have very, I won't say easily, but just got it right. And yeah, I mean, it's like Google saying, we want to know what makes a high performing team. So they have, you know, Project Aristotle, and they found it was all about psychological safety, you know, and that's a big issue for a lot of other organizations. And they should be looking to these, probably the leaders, or what you'd say, the elite organizations that have got it right. You know, why is Amazon so successful, or Apple, or Netflix, or Google, or Microsoft? And look to these people and go, what are they doing that we could leverage? I don't know why organizations don't do it. They probably go, oh, we're not an Apple, we're not an Amazon, we're not a Microsoft, we're a 100-year-old financial institution. But that's like saying, well, I don't know, we can learn from other people, surely, you know?
I do feel I've gotten the question many times in every company I've worked for from from partners, for example, or even from customers that, hey, what are you doing about this, right? What can we learn from you when you were going through this? How did you make these adjustments? So I do feel there is definitely a curiosity and an interest in general in
Yeah.
learning from the people who have gone before us, if you will. So I don't think that people are like, we're going to figure this out for ourselves. We don't want inspiration. I think there's a recognition that, wow, this is new for all of us. We're in it together. I can learn from the best here. And what are the best practices? Teach me a little bit. I feel like that, even if that doesn't kind of bubble to the top and come out in the official channels, it happens behind the scenes, right? In meetings or after meetings or between meetings, or well, how did you do this, right? How did that work? Did you try this? Or I'm thinking about this. What do you think? So there's definitely interesting and kind of peer-to-peer mind melding about how we get through this.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I was talking to someone a few weeks ago who's started this like a business, I would say networking, but it's really getting businesses to talk to each other in Australia to leverage, learnings and how did you get over this issue, or how did you go about adopting, cloud or becoming more agile or whatever. And the guy I was talking to did a lot of work in Europe, and he said there's a lot more inter-business collaboration and learning, but in Australia it's very much they won't. It's very siloed. Apparently, the business
Right.
don't talk to each other. So that was interesting. Yeah. So it's like, no, we're not gonna. And I think it's a bit of a like a competitive thing. If I tell you that we're maybe struggling with this challenge, then you could take advantage of that. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah.
That is interesting, especially if that's like a geographical difference that it's different down under.
Yeah. Interesting.
There's another book.
Another book. So Stig, if you had a magic wand for your customers and you could get the next organization to make the move to cloud and make it an absolute success and for them to realize the benefits, what would it be?
I think it starts with a little bit more of an open mind, right? Many times you're in here, you're doing this evangelical sale, you're talking about the advantage of it, and everybody's nodding, and they're, yep, get it. And then the questioning starts, what, can it do this? Can it do that? Does it do this in 4 colors? Can it take copies? Can it make coffee? And like, no, but can you do that on-prem today? And they're like, no. But then, so, why do you have these crazy high aspirations as to what this thing can do for you, right? It can do everything you're doing today and more. It can do it better, probably cheaper, not necessarily, depending on, what's going on. So try it, try it for a couple of reasons, right? Try it for organizational success, try it for competitive advantage, try it for your own career. One thing I've noticed is, kind of getting back to the people theme, everybody who has done anything with cloud, it doesn't have to be very much, that opens up new career opportunities. Everybody's interested in what you think, everybody's interested in what you learn, everybody's interested in what you can do for them in this space. So as I said before, where there's complexity, there's opportunity. There's a ton of complexity here. Embrace it. Individuals should embrace it. Organizations should embrace it and figure out what it can mean for them, because it's complex right now, but it's a very, very worthwhile investment of time and resources to kind of figure out how we leverage that for the best of our organizations and certainly for the best of our careers.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting time. I think, you just mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you look at the change that we've gone through, I think this age is just amazing. And it'll probably be the next generation will be going through the same. But, and you just lose the cliche of, the amount of power you have in your mobile phone in your hand was like, put a man on the moon, it's like crazy stuff, just crazy stuff. And we just take so much of it for granted. And I think, cloud and, infrastructure as service and platform and software as service and all this is just going to keep the speed of change is just going to keep increasing. And I think from a people perspective, we need to have due care and diligence and make sure that we give everyone the resources they need to embrace that constant change and accept that. And it's like you said earlier, It's having the conversation. We don't know what we don't know. You know, we know we've got to do things differently. We're not quite sure what it looks like yet. And we're not quite sure what's around the corner. And we really don't know what our competitors are going to do. And we really don't know what the next technology is going to be. But let's keep talking.
And there's one way to find out. I'm not saying we should be careless, right? Or you know, not be thoughtful about how we invest and what directions that we're moving in. But in general, I feel like be a little more of that, right? That, hey, you know, we know this is fantastic. We know it's coming. We know it can do something for us. Let's be proactive about how we leverage it.
Yeah, let's explore. Let's take a look. Stig, it's been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And I know it's yesterday for you, and it's tomorrow for me. I love time differences. Crazy stuff. I'll tell you what the lottery numbers are.
Yes, could you do that? That'd be fantastic.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Stig. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.